She sat in silence, surrounded by a room filled with light, while her heart felt as dark as an endless abyss. Her phone buzzed nonstop, emails piled up, voices called her name. But it all sounded like noise from a world she no longer belonged to. A woman who was once strong, once a source of pride for so many, now quietly removed the mask of success she had worn for years. And on an ordinary afternoon, like any other, she decided to let it all go. Because she finally realized, somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. Beneath the flawless shell of success, no one knew how long she had been quietly withering inside her own life. She was the woman everyone admired. A brilliant career, a powerful title, inspiring speeches, and social media filled with praise. They called her a symbol of modern resilience, a role model for the women of today. But no one saw that behind every closed door, she felt like she was free-falling through a bottomless void. She couldn't remember the last time she had a full night's sleep. Back-to-back meetings, forced smiles at endless parties, conversations that felt hollow. Her life had become a perfectly programmed machine. And she had run that machine so well that she forgot who she was, what she once dreamed of, what she once loved. Her loss didn't come from a single, dramatic moment. It came slowly, quietly, like water dripping on stone, until it carved a hollow space in her heart. The day her mother died, she arrived late, busy finalizing a contract. When love walked away, all she said was, "Go. I have nothing left to hold you with." Every loss passed without tears, without resistance. Just a growing, suffocating emptiness. Then one afternoon, as sunset filtered through the glass windows, she sat still, watching her phone ring nonstop. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She just sat there, and felt like she had already died a long time ago. She stood up, took nothing but a small backpack, left no note, expected no understanding. She wasn't running away. She was going to find the one thing worth holding on to: herself. She left the city on a quiet early morning, when most people were still asleep and the daily rush hadn't yet begun. No announcement, no goodbyes. Just the steady sound of wheels on the road, carrying her farther and farther away from the place that had once trapped her in a prison of expectations and pressure. For the first time in years, she carried no schedule, no clear destination. All she knew was this: she needed to leave. The farther, the better. Her small backpack held just a few clothes, a notebook, and an old photo of herself as a child. Bright eyes, an innocent smile. She looked at it whenever she felt unsteady. A quiet reminder that there was once a time she lived for joy, not for invisible medals or the approval of strangers. The journey began with discomfort. She didn't know how to slow down. Didn't know what to do without Wi-Fi, without deadlines, without anyone calling her name. In the first few days in that unfamiliar countryside, she struggled with the silence. No phones, no emails, no watching eyes. Just her. The sound of birdsong, the wind brushing through trees, and the voice within her, one she had silenced for far too long. She began relearning the simplest things. Brewing a pot of tea, slowly and with care. Writing a few honest lines in her journal. Walking dusty trails, running her fingers along the rough bark of trees. Some days, the emptiness was so loud she cried. But on other mornings, she smiled just from seeing sunlight filter through the curtains. Little by little, the smallest moments began to whisper life back into her. She met people who didn't know who she was, who didn't care what she had done. They saw her simply as a person, offering her humble meals, sharing everyday stories. No judgment, no expectations. And for the first time in a very long while, she felt something lift from her chest. And somewhere in that quiet journey, she began to hear a voice she had forgotten. Soft, unsure, but more real than anything she had known in years. The days passed quietly among the mountains and trees, slowly weaving themselves into her. As if she had always belonged here, she just hadn't known it. Each morning no longer began with that dragging exhaustion. Instead, she woke with a deep breath. A slow gaze out toward the mist-covered forest. In that stillness, she began to hear her own voice again. The one long drowned beneath the noise of the world. Who have I been living for all these years? Who was I? And what do I truly want? She started to write. Not speeches, not business strategies. But forgotten memories. Small dreams left in the dark. She wrote about the little girl who once wanted to be an artist. About her mother, who used to hold her every night and gently ask, "Were you happy today?" She wrote about laughing until she couldn't breathe. And then crying. Realizing she hadn't felt that in so long. One day, an old woman from the village sat beside her, staring into the distance, and said, "When people live too fast, their soul can't keep up with their body. And one day, they'll have to stop and wait for themselves to return." The words hit her like a wave. She had left herself behind, chasing things that sparkled on the outside but were hollow inside. One rainy afternoon, she stood in the middle of a field. Rain lashed her face, cold and soaking. But she didn't run for cover. She looked up at the sky and cried, like she hadn't in years. Tears poured out, not from sadness, but from the realization that she could still feel, that her heart still beat with longing, with life. That was the moment she woke up. She didn't need to be strong all the time. She didn't need to be right, or brilliant, or perfect. She understood now. Just being herself, nothing more, nothing less, was enough. For the first time in what felt like forever, she no longer felt empty. She felt herself returning. Slowly, gently, and truthfully. After months of living in nature, she knew it was time to return. Not to her old life, but to face, gently yet firmly, everything that once made her lose herself. Healing wasn't just about leaving. It was about being strong enough to come back. To look the past in the eye. With a heart that no longer held blame. The city hadn't changed. Still loud, still crowded. Still a place where people could easily lose each other in the blur of daily chaos. But she had changed. She stepped off the bus without rush, without the guarded look she used to wear. No makeup, no polished outfit. Just an old sweater. And a steady gaze. Like someone who had walked through a storm. And survived. She returned to the apartment. That once felt like a prison of unspoken feelings. Where every corner had soaked up her stress. But today, she flung the windows wide open, letting the light pour in. She cleaned out every drawer, tossing away what no longer belonged. Bulky files, meaningless business cards, outfits that had suffocated her spirit. She also met with people from her before. Former colleagues, friends, even the relationships that had once drained her. For the first time, she didn't pretend to be okay. She didn't try to please. She said no when she meant it. She stayed silent when she had nothing to say. And she smiled. Not out of politeness, but because she genuinely felt at peace. No one really knew where she had been, or what she had gone through. But that no longer mattered. Because now, no one could shake her. She didn't need to be understood. She didn't need validation. All she needed was to protect the peace she had reclaimed. A small but steady flame in the middle of the storm. She didn't come back to start over the old way. She came back to live differently. More deeply. More consciously. And most importantly, as herself. Without needing anyone's permission. She began to live again, but this time, with a completely different mindset. No more packed schedules. No more soul-draining meetings. No more obsession with being strong or perfect in others' eyes. She lived slowly now, quietly, intentionally. Each morning, she made herself coffee, opened the window to let in the sunlight, and scribbled a few thoughts in the worn notebook she'd brought back from her journey. She learned how to care for herself through meals, through sleep, and through the sacred silence of her own mind. She no longer chased any race. She chose freelance work, just enough to live, and enough time to breathe, to listen inward. She also began telling her story, not to complain, but to share. A small blog. A few posts online. Then, little by little, quiet conversations with people who were just as tired as she once was. She didn't teach anyone how to live. She simply told her truth about loss, about silence, about the first rain that made her cry. And the moment she saw herself in the mirror again, ordinary, but so achingly real. People found their way to her. Not because she was inspiring, but because in her, they saw someone who had broken, fallen all the way down, but still found the strength to rise and to keep walking. She became a mirror, imperfect, but honest. And that was worth more than any title she had ever held. She still lived in the same city. Still walked the same streets that once bore the weight of her exhaustion. But now, each step was a breath of peace. She no longer feared loss. Because the things worth letting go, she had already released. And the things worth keeping, she now held gently, fiercely, with all her heart. And life continued. Not loud, not dazzling, but simply, beautifully, as it was meant to. Each day, she lived true to herself. And that was enough. There was a time she thought she'd never rise again. That everything inside her had shattered beyond repair. But as it turned out, the breaking was not the end. It was the beginning of a journey home. Not back to the world, but back to herself. She was no longer the woman who bent over backwards for approval. No longer the lost soul wandering beneath city lights. Now, she was simply herself. Hurt enough to understand. Strong enough to be gentle. Wise enough to know. Nothing is more precious than a soul at peace. If you're tired, if you feel like you're alive but not truly living, pause. Listen. You may not need to go as far as she did. Maybe all you need is the courage to let go of what no longer feels like you. Because sometimes, one small step back is the first step toward the light. And you are worthy of that light.